And today I'm actually very excited and very pleased to have a special guest, my friend Melanie here. She's actually been part of the Christian Truthers slash Torah Observant slash MTOI movement, and she's had quite an experience there over several years. And so as we continue to sort of start talking about deconstruction, both on my channel and also offline and on her channel, because she has an excellent YouTube channel as well, which I will link in the description box later, we started to realize that there's a lot to discuss here that we both felt would be beneficial to the public to actually share. So with that quick introduction, hey, Melanie, how are you doing?
Good, Justin. How are you? Thanks for having me on your channel. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I'm doing great. You've got a little bit of a thunderstorm here. It seems like every time I go live, there's a thunderstorm. So I guess the gods are telling us something.
Interesting. Same thing is happening here. So yeah.
Cool. Well, hey, you know what? I figured we should just jump straight into this because there's so much to unpack here. And like I said in the beginning, you've had a very interesting and unique experience going through your sort of transformation and evolution through spirituality and Christianity, kind of similar to mine in many situations, and also many of the viewers who watch this channel. So, but let's just get started from the beginning. Like, I know initially that you kind of had a Christian upbringing, and I actually thought you were a Christian your whole life, but I'm not sure if that's correct. Tell me a little bit more about your Christian upbringing and your religious environment growing up, if you would.
Yeah, sure. So I was raised Christian, and then I kind of belonged to it for a long time up until I was 25 years old. It was really important to my family that I be Christian, and from the time I was 9 years old, I was asked to go to church and eventually get to the place where I would become saved. I was baptized when I was 16. I had a lot of interesting things happen in my life. Like, I attended youth group in high school, and I just always kind of saw some holes in like the things that I was belonging to. And so at 25, I decided to get out of the church after being exposed to like purity culture and chaperones, like when talking to like brothers in my church, and even like other sisters as they're called. And so I decided to leave and join a Buddhist monastery close to where I live now. I was with that for a couple of years, and then I kind of like fell away from everything for a while. But Buddhism was like the most interesting thing because during that time I met two of the Dalai Lama's monks, and so I had them um, meditate with me during a conference and stuff like that. It was really cool.
Wow.
So I've had a lot. I've had a lot happen.
So you were like really involved in the Buddhist community. So you like did you travel to different conferences and things like that? Is that how that works? Or
No, so they came to Bozeman and met everybody that was a member, and I
Mhm.
was able to meet them there. And there was like a 3-day lecture of where like they taught us different like meditation techniques, and we talked about enlightenment and stuff like that. And so I never really traveled. I wasn't in it that long, but it took a certain amount of like discipline and a certain amount of effort to be able to like do stuff like that. And
Mhm.
so I just went with it. Um,
Yeah.
and kind of it's weird because it's kind of been that way my whole journey. I've kind of just gone with things and seen if they fit, and I've always found that it either does for a while or it doesn't. And I think it might be the rules and like expectations that really have put me in this place where I'm always feeling like I've got to fit a mold. And then
Mhm.
I kind of pull back, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah, it's really cool. It's really interesting the way sort of like the spiritual journey works for a lot of us because I think at the core of spirituality, we like are seeking freedom, not
Hmm.
necessarily freedom from like any rules or something, but just freedom in general, like freedom of thought, freedom of expression. And it's so interesting because many times as we get into one discipline or another to try and find that freedom and that self-awareness or whatever, we start becoming encumbered by religious concepts that are often brought with it and introduced by certain parties and things like that. So yeah, I can see, but it's interesting too because now that you've sort of developed through and past Christianity, which we'll get to in a minute, it's probably some of the stuff you learned in the Buddhist principles are probably more valuable to you now than you even realized while you were in Christianity.
Yeah, I would say now I I feel as though freedom is more relevant. I don't feel like there's an expectation on me in terms of religious practice, and that's
Mhm.
the thing that I have the issue with. I think being in Torah, being Christian, and being in just like a variety of like different things and like trying to figure out what I actually believe, there was always that hang up of, I have to meditate for a certain amount of time, or I have to study for a certain amount of time, or I have to live a certain lifestyle, and now none of those things are there. And so I think that freedom is even more relevant because I'm not living for something that is around me. I'm living for myself, and that was a really tough one deconstructing. Like being able to just say, okay, well, I can do this on my own. I don't have to have something to fall back on.
Right.
Yesterday, I actually finished packing up all the stuff that I had out from being in Torah and like being involved in Christianity. And I was like, wow, that's the first. And it's like, I don't think I ever want to pull those back out. I couldn't believe how many Bibles I had. I was like,
Oh my
holy,
God.
holy shit. Like it was crazy. I think I packed 10 books away, and yeah,
Oh yeah, I
yeah,
definitely get that. I have a box right next to my desk over here, and it's completely filled with books that are exactly like that I collected through my spiritual, like especially Christian and Torah journey.
yeah.
And like I know what you mean. Sometimes I whip them back out just to be like, I don't know. It's kind of weird to reminisce, but at the same time, I'm lining them up to sell them all on eBay because I don't have a use for most of them anymore. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
so it's interesting because you sort of were raised in a Christian, I think you said when we talked earlier, Methodist primarily home, but then you
Yeah.
sort of transitioned into a more Buddhist philosophy.
Hmm.
So, uh, take us through the journey. Like, how old were you? How long were you in Buddhism? And then what kind of started bringing you from Buddhism back to Christian thinking?
I let's see. So if I wanted to talk about like the Methodist part of it,
Mhm,
that's my foundation. And that's what my parents were, that's what my grandparents were, and then my like extended family is all Baptist. And so I did that for tradition's sake until I was probably 25, and then
mhm,
I got into Buddhism from the time I was like 25 to 27.
mhm,
um, and then just kind of like let it go
mhm,
uh, after that, and then didn't really pick anything back up for quite a while. And I think it was just studying stuff online, like world events, and then there was all this crazy stuff happening, like um, astrologically in
mhm.
2017 and 2018.
I remember.
And I kind of fell into that sinkhole. I don't know if you remember the blood moons in 2018,
Oh yeah, yeah.
late 2017, 2018. And I remembered reading about that in the Bible growing up. And I had like youth group pastors tell me how important it was. Like if the signs were out, then something was actually happening. And
Mhm,
it sounds nuts, but that's how I fell back into faith because I started to see things and I couldn't explain them any other way. And so I went back to my foundation, which is Christianity. And I thought, well, maybe I'll give it another shot. I got bored with it at like probably around, I want to say, age 31. I
mhm.
got really bored with it. And I'm like, I don't want to go to church anymore. I
Yeah.
felt like the sermon was recycled. I felt like the pastors were just like talking about the same thing. And so my husband and I shopped around for quite a while, and we were like jumping from place to place, like trying to find a human that you could
Mhm,
go up to after Sunday service and just ask a question without them getting like pissed at you and like telling you to go away. We
mhm,
didn't find it. And so in 20, I think it was like late 2018, I stumbled on um, channels that were kind of like it almost felt like my thoughts were being put out there, and I was like, oh
mhm.
wow. And so Christian Truthers happened to be one of those channels at that time, and I learned a lot about the things that I had always been skeptical about when I was
Mhm.
younger. And I just started to research, and then one thing led to another, and I got into Torah like by some weird coincidence, just because it lined up with what I thought. I was
Mhm.
also really conservative at that time. Um, and so it just kind of matched the scene,
Yeah.
so to speak. Yeah. I honestly now, like, I don't think that I fall into any of those categories. Like, I don't, I don't align with any of that stuff. It's interesting how you can go from different things in life, and then you get to a point you're like, nothing fits. Like, I am who I am at this point.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's interesting. It's so cool because I remember that same period of time, 2017, especially. 2017 is actually when I started Christian Truthers, the YouTube channel, obviously. And it was around that time we had the September 11th star planetary conjunction coming up for the rapture.
right.
Um, and then we had the blood moons, and then there was more blood moons in 2018. And yeah, it was the same time for me too, same time frame where I was having these sort of existential thoughts and trying to match what I thought was the reality of the cosmology around us and what we're seeing in the sky and the end times events, so to speak. All that sort of like spurred me on too to like create Christian Truthers and start sharing and partner up with other people who were speaking the same type of things. And so I completely understand that. It was sort of like an end times excitement that kind of like got me energetic about it initially when I really dove into Christianity again in 2017, 2016, somewhere there. So yeah, it's cool. Yeah, and so with that excitement comes excitement about taking the scriptures as literally as possible, right? And I know that's how you evolved, just like I did and my YouTube partners did. So it goes from okay, the rapture is coming because of all these star signs to okay, well the rapture passed, that's not happening. So what's next? And you start digging in and re-questioning all of the assumptions you made. Trying to find okay, well, what's the next way out? Then where's the next window? And for us, for me, it was through Torah, and again, like Adam and all these people, we're like, no, there. First of all, we realized there is no rapture according to our new doctrinal belief system, and then second
Yeah.
of all, if we're going to get out of here safe, it's going to have to be through Torah, and so it took us down that path. Is that similar to you?
Yeah, and it was an interesting thing too, because I got kind of hooked on like the Hebrew side of stuff, like learning a different language and learning. I guess it was the Dead Sea Scrolls that really like kind of started the whole thing for me, because that was something that I didn't know anything about, and I guess there's mention of it in the Bible about finding the 12 clay jars in a cave. And I
Mm.
don't remember what book it's in, but I remember reading something about that. And so when I found something that was online about those being uncovered, I was like, oh, wow. And I started to look for those like legit signs that were um, on Earth and were visible. And I think it was a video that was about Noah's Ark that really like got me super zealous. When I saw that video, that was full convincing of okay, maybe this really is real. And then there was an article, I think it was like a year or two later, about how a chariot wheel was found
That's
from
the
like the Exodus supposedly. And
oh
so
yeah,
it was
yeah,
those things that kind of like solidified it. And I was like, wow, maybe this group that I'm in knows something that like I don't know. And everything that they're talking about, I'm finding is online. And I'm like, wow, like this is the first time anyone's ever been super truthful with me. And so it just kind of kept building and building and building. And I climbed up the ladder with meeting leaders and like doing things um, pretty quickly. And like I think I was in about 3.5 years.
hmm
Yeah.
yeah. That's actually a good segue because so you not only took Torah on as something you personally believed in
Mhm.
and started to follow it, but you also became extremely involved with different communities, etc.
Yeah.
So what you already brought that up. So what kind of initiatives did you work on, like studies you were involved in, volunteer stuff? Like, how are you involved with the community?
I didn't take on any volunteer stuff at all, but I did participate in a study group. I think it was like in 2020, and it
Mhm.
was a pretty small study group, and it was with a channel on YouTube crossing over.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
was emailing that creator of that channel back and forth quite a bit. And so she asked me to join her group, and I thought it was going to be a big deal, like, some Zoom thing, and it would be like 300 people. And I got in there and there was like 8 people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that really like threw me off. And then after a few studies, it was kind of clear that I was being groomed
Mhm.
to be, I want to call it teacher's pet, or be like right underneath this creator, because she had me um, going into stuff that like only was talked about kind of behind the scenes. So learning more about the community, like how men and women should be separate. They couldn't attend
Mhm.
Bible study together. And I was like, well, what if they're married? And they're like, well, they have to be observed and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, wow. So there was that. And then there was also this part of the group that was like super uncomfortable, because at that point I was dressing really modestly, and I was really like I said, I was pretty zealous about things because I was
Mhm.
still kind of new to it. I was maybe a year and a half, 2 years in.
Mhm.
And so I was wearing head coverings at the time, and she made a remark about how that wasn't required, and was like literally rebuking me in front of the other people that I was with.
Mhm.
And so at that time, I'm like, okay, well, maybe not. But I thought, isn't it important or more relevant to be respectful of someone, regardless of like what they're wearing or what they believe, than it is to call them out on it? And that
Mhm.
was just one of many examples, that group in particular, that started to show me the holes in the group as a whole.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think I did that for probably 3 or 4 months. And I left a couple of times, and I came back to that particular Bible study, and it just never got better. And
Yeah.
so I ended up pulling out of what was a Torah community that I knew, and I joined MTOI in like late 2020. I think it was July 2020 I was initiated.
And
Yeah.
just so everyone knows, MTOI is Messianic Torah Observant Israel, which is like a international group for Torah observant Messianic Jewish style worship. So yeah, it's a really big group. So you got connected with MTOI, and I think you told me that you actually met one or two of the leaders when you were there as well.
Yeah, I met the owner and leader, Steve Berkson, and his wife personally. And then I met another guy that is featured in a lot of his videos, that's like one of his deacons, and then another one of his deacons. And it was a huge family oriented place, but there's a lot there's a lot to it. So I thought, at this point I was ready to be baptized again, which was part of what Torah believers think is like, okay, it's not just once. The fundamental principles of it are, you need to repent often, baptize as often as you can,
Mhm.
clean, sin as often as you can. So this was like a second run at that. And I met I met them during that whole thing. Like, my husband and I drove down to an event. We were in Virginia at the time, and so we drove down to Tennessee to meet them. And it was like super interesting. We attended a dinner the night after, and like the night before, they had like a huge celebration thing. And
Mhm.
at the time, like, I thought, wow, this is really welcoming. Like, I can't believe they're throwing a dinner for people they don't know. And there was like 200 people there. And the idea was is that if you joined their community first, that they could kind of persuade you to do things after that, that I had no idea until like kind of towards the end of the weekend. they were hoping that we would relocate and like actually join their group. And my husband and I are like, no, like we don't really know you. Like, how would you uproot your life? And so we were standing in line at dinner, and I think this was like the Saturday evening after mikvah or baptism, and we met this couple from Montana, and they had moved from Montana all the way to Tennessee to join the group, and they had like left their jobs, they sold their house, they had done everything that they could to like get into this group. And I was like, wow, like that's when I knew something was wrong. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen a lot of that. Not with MTOI specifically, because I was never really
Mhm.
involved with them. But yeah,
Yep.
I know, like, I mean, probably 10 to 20 families who literally sold everything, moved into the middle of nowhere to be part of a Torah community, etc. And some of them are still hanging out and still hanging in out there, but some of them got tired of it after a while and quit. And like you said earlier, with the head covering thing, Jackie, of course, she wore a head covering for, I want to say, about 2 years, and then eventually she started to stop wearing it, but she still would wear it on occasion, like when we did special feasts, events, and things like that. She would still wear it because she thought it was a good reminder of Paul's teachings, and of course of her place in the Torah community, etc. But yeah, it's so funny because I was obviously I facilitated and set up um, hundreds of Zoom meetings. In fact, we started a Christian Truthers Fellowship where we coordinated this massive like project of getting everyone into groups of 10 and getting them onto different apps and stuff and starting these weekly Bible studies. And of course, Adam and other channels got involved with it too and started coming to the studies, and it got bigger and bigger for a while. But yeah, it became pretty clear, like after a while, that there was too much. I guess you would say we call it virtue signaling out here in the real world, but
Mhm.
over there it was more like an attempt to nitpick someone. So, but it wasn't really because you wanted to put them down. It was more that you wanted to flex your knowledge. You wanted to flex your like higher wisdom and like, oh, you're wearing a head covering. I've grown past that. I don't need that anymore. Like, and it's like you're completely missing the point. It's completely irrelevant to the study, to the love, to the what we're supposed to be doing here. And
Right.
so, yeah, I know what you mean. Like, there's always that like teacher's pet who wants to pop in and be like, technically what you said 10 minutes ago, that one verse was out of context. And you're like, well, that's completely beside the point. Now you're just nitpicking people to show people how wise and smart you are and things. And that's so annoying. It's because there's still egos, obviously, in the Torah community. They're all over the place. So it's frustrating to
Mhm.
watch.
Yeah.
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 Wow. Okay, so you end up kind of breaking away from the initial group you were part of, and at least having some experience with MTOI, but you didn't join their group the way they wanted you to. So how did you continue in Torah after that? And by the way, just because there's a lot of different versions of what Torah is. Of course, if you're a Messianic Jew living in Israel, your version of Torah might be different than the one that we followed in many aspects because of just denominational and religious sort of cultural uh, I don't know. They have relics and things like they do all the Davidic dancing and all that stuff at MTOI, I think, and at other yeah, and they don't do any of that stuff with the Torah stuff I did. So, uh, you were keeping Torah, so you were doing a Saturday Shabbat, correct? And
Yeah, I
no
was.
no pork or shellfish, no
Yeah.
unclean foods according to Scripture, right? Yeah, and then
Yeah.
keeping all the 7 feast days through the year. Did you keep the other holidays like Christmas, Easter, none of that, right?
No.
All pagan, right?
Yeah,
Totally
at that
pagan.
time. Yep, at that time. And it's interesting because they all had the same premise of like stuff that you could and couldn't do. Um, and world holidays or pagan holidays were out.
Mhm,
And so no, and I'm still coming out of that like isolation piece of being involved in these groups for so long and deciding like what our family actually wants to do. And
mhm,
so when Mother's Day hit this year, we were like, well, what do we do? Because this is the first year where I've been, more than I would say secular, but more than like thinking for myself about what's right and what's wrong.
mhm,
And we're like all super confused because even though I've been out for quite a while, I've left like a year and a half ago. my husband and my son are still like, well, you said no to that 2 years ago, so what are we doing now? And like not having to keep Shabbat, not having to keep like all of these different things. Like there's so much more time to do other things now. It's been really amazing to just be able to spend time with my family
Mhm.
and not feel like I'm pressuring them to do stuff that they didn't want to do.
Mhm.
And that's where we ended up was I could tell that they were not wanting to keep um, like spiritual feasts and keep dietary stuff, but they did that because they were respectful of my belief. And then I just found out this weekend, I asked them both, my son Elijah and my husband Drew, and I was like, so what do you think about it? Do you like me now or do you like me better when I was involved in all of that? And they're like, no, you're much happier now. Please don't. Like my son is 10 and he's like, please don't go back to doing any of that. He goes, all I remember doing is watching um, Shabbat service on Saturday
Mhm.
because during that time MTOI was like in COVID protocol. And
Yeah.
so all of our services were like online and like on YouTube, which was really weird. And so my son remembers that and he's like, that was like the most horrible, boring experience of my life. He's like, so please, I don't want to go back. And he never really understood much of it. And
Mhm.
so it was very confusing to him. My husband grew up Episcopalian. And so for him, it was like, this was completely different being in Torah, and he was never like really into it either. And
Mhm.
so I guess to answer the question like on a short way, like I became on my own. And
Yeah.
for the last like year and a half that I was in, like I was by myself. Yeah, because it became too much, and the rules and like expectations and stuff like with work and school and obligations, like my family just backed out totally. Like they couldn't do it. And
I
I
talk.
don't,
Yeah. Go
yeah.
ahead. Sorry.
I
Finish.
mean,
Go ahead.
I don't I guess I don't want to say I don't blame them because there's no blame in this, but I understand it completely. Like I get how hard that was, and that's why I've left faith completely, and why I consider myself to be agnostic and also atheist at this point is
Mhm.
because I always felt like growing up that I had to kind of dull myself out.
Mhm.
I couldn't be who I wanted to be because of the things that were required of me spiritually. And so that was my reason for leaving. There's a bunch of other stuff too. And I'll get to that. But just being made to do things and not being able to enjoy life was just like way too much. Like I
Oh,
can't
yeah.
can't
Yeah.
do it.
I,
I can't do it anymore.
yeah, I totally understand that. Yeah, there's so much about what you said that just like reminds me so much of my experience too. I mean, I was very lucky, I guess you could say, that I had Jackie at least and a couple of kids who were really on board and really liked it. But then I had two other kids who were like not really on board and they lived with their mother half the time. So um, she was always telling them how ridiculous what we're doing was. And so it was kind of like they were 1 foot in, 1 foot out. They were trying to just appease me, I think. But my actual wife and my kids that live with me were like hardcore, full on. They took it seriously, and I'm to this day. I'll always be grateful for watching them be willing to have the discipline and be willing to trust me and show me the respect that they felt they needed
Yeah.
to at least try to do what we all thought was the right thing according to scripture, to God and things. So on the one hand, it's like um, it sucks that I kind of feel like I kind of put them through more struggle than they needed to for a couple of years. But on the other hand, it just makes them feel so much more free now. They really appreciate their freedoms now. I mean, like Saturdays were burdensome to us because we had to cook all of our food. We didn't believe in cooking on the Shabbat either, and that's another whole argument. But um, we had to prep all of our food the day beforehand.
Yep.
We would cook and prep all of our animals' food because we had chickens, dogs, cats, and everything, turtle, whatever. um, And we would clean the house, and we'd just be up all Friday night, essentially getting ready for Shabbat the next day. And then I'd usually do a live stream on Friday night for a Shabbat service as it kicked off. Because, well, depending on if you start Shabbat Friday night or Saturday morning. So that's another thing. But yeah, it was a lot of work. And then on the actual Shabbat, it was, it was not that hard, obviously. We wake up, we eat whatever we set out for ourselves, we hang out, sit around. But I didn't want my kids watching, like, or playing video games that were violent and watching cartoons and stuff that had nothing to do with keeping the day holy. And so Jackie and I were trying to encourage the kids to just stay in, like, Bible-based texts, or to do journaling, or to do art, and we would just sit around and talk. But they were so bored. They were so bored, but they were troopers about it. They really tried to, like, support me and everything. But yeah, in the long run, when we finally started talking to them about our beliefs changing, I remember them saying that. It was one of the first things they said when I started talking to them about leaving Torah observance, where they were like, "Does this mean we can, like, go to the park on Saturdays?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it does." And they're like, "Yes." So they don't even want to go do evil, terrible work-like things. They just want to relax in a normal way that doesn't require us to, like, not carry a burden out of our house. Like, I didn't even want to let them carry a beach bag out of the front door on Shabbat because of what the scripture says. So we were very strict about it. So it was hard on them. But yeah, I remember that.
That's exactly how I was. And it's interesting because when you hear it's so much, and you're in that group and you're talking about it all the time, you really fully believe it.
Mhm,
And you in your heart at the time, you think, well, I'm doing the right thing. And
mhm,
I guess I really didn't notice how big of an impact it was making,
mhm.
and how it had affected my relationships, even with my extended family. I no longer talk to my extended family because of my choice to get involved with Messianic Judaism.
Same.
Yeah, they like won't even, because they're all Bible Belt. I was raised in Virginia, and so my whole family is Baptist, and they're all church. And so, I remember trying to share uh, what I thought was like Jesus's real name with my mom, and I gave her scripture that was like in Hebrew and stuff. And this was like not early on, probably I want to say 3 years ago now. And my mom took scripture home and like looked at it and read through it, and she's like, my Bible doesn't say any of the stuff that's in this Bible. And she was like so mad at me, she returned it and gave me this thing from church that was talking about how I should repent, and how I was, like going against what I had been raised to believe and stuff. It was just a mess. Like, I remember pushing it on her pretty hard too. And
Mhm.
so
I did the
that's
same thing.
that burden thing that you're talking about. Like, I completely did that. I can say that I hurt a lot of people around me doing what I thought was right. And so
Mhm.
it's nice to not be feeling like I have to practice that and live in that fear of, if I don't do this, then God's going to be angry with me. Like, that's a huge relief.
Yeah.
Because I spent most of my life like that. And even without it, there was a lot of that. And so, yeah, the whole thing about not carrying burden outside your door. Yeah, I mean, it's just like a really good example of one thing
Mhm.
that I remember for me too.
Mhm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, I knew families that were, like, living off the land, essentially
yeah, yeah,
parking an RV on a piece of land that they rented, and they're farming it, and they're living in the middle of nowhere. And I would talk to them, and they literally would have their kids essentially laying in bed and sitting in the RV all day, and they weren't allowed to do anything except color, like, coloring sheets that were printed out from, like, the Sefer Publishing, like, some curriculum. Not, I mean, not Sefer Publishing, but Hallelujah Scriptures or something. So yeah,
yeah,
it was treacherous, man. And same thing, I put the pressures on my friends and family, my mom especially. I really dug into my mom, trying to get her to, because she was a little open to it for a while.
yeah,
But we had a lot of conversations where I was trying to really take her to the next level of trying to show her that Paul was teaching Torah, which is another long conversation. You know that how that pitch goes. But were you using, like, What kind of Bible were you using? I'm curious. What translations did you prefer at the time?
So I started with the scriptures, which is like a blue cover,
Mhm.
and that's what MTOI used. And then I went with Sefer in like 2019, 2020. I got into that.
Same.
And I thought that that was it, you know,
Mhm.
at that time, because it was written completely different. There were books in the Sefer that were omitted, and you know that quest for truth, you know, I thought at that time that that's exactly what I was winding up with, but
Mhm.
obviously not. And then towards the end I went to NIV,
Mhm.
um, because there was research involved and it had been translated to the point where it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like there's no guesswork. So there wasn't as much study involved.
Mhm.
Maybe because I got lazy with it, but like I have so many Tree of Life version. Like I just went through
Yeah.
like so many different things. And I remember opening up 3 different Bibles at a time and looking at verses and being like, wait a minute, why does this say this? And then this says
Mhm.
this. And it's like, yeah, don't even do that with the New Testament. Like
Okay.
that's just not even, yeah, I don't, I
You could
don't want
build
to
a
talk
whole
about that, but yeah.
you could build a whole channel just on comparing and contrasting the different, you know, uh, interpretations. It was, and that's kind of what I did. I mean, literally, I was like, well, the Bible says this, and Christians think it means this because it's in the NIV. It says this, but then I would be like, well, what does the Greek say? What does the Hebrew say? And then it's like, well, which Greek, which Hebrew, and from what era, from which translation, and it's very it's funny looking back at it because we thought that we were finding the deeper hidden truths that had been like obscured by man's flaws and errors. But it's funny because looking at it now from like I guess from the outside perspective and with a lot of hindsight, you're like, look, if the true message is really buried that deeply within one of these translations, or maybe a little bit here, a little bit there, then this is a completely uh, like illogical methodology for God to use to translate his truth to us. And that would be obviously completely unfair to anyone because you're telling me that you can read the whole NIV or the whole KJV and then and still be corrupted, even though you're trying to do what God wants you to do. And so when you really get into that like level
Yep.
of detail in the weeds, you're like, this is illogical. Like it's not fair.
It's a
So
nightmare. It's a
it really
nightmare.
is. So you kept Torah for quite a while, exercising your faith, and
Mhm.
like I wanted to bring forward like some of the practices that we keep in Torah to remind people that when we kept this, we really, really did it with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength to the best of our ability, and prayer, and
Mhm.
fasting, and tears, and loss of relationships, even for me, kids, parents, uncles, aunts, cousins, old friends. So it was extremely uh, genuine. It was sincere. It was with a full desire to do what God wants. So if you could, and I know for me, there's like 10 different ways I could approach what started my deconstruction journey. So it's like, which one do I pick from? Because they all happened kind of around the same time. But what would you say kickstarted your doubt in Torah observance, other than just people being losers, to an extent?
Yeah. So, okay. Biggest issue has always been for me the requirement to tithe,
Mhm.
and I know that's an interesting way to put it, but that was one of the things that got me, along with behaviors of other Christians or people that, you know, believed and acted completely different and justified it. Um, but tithing was the big one. I
Mhm.
remember I was watching a Shabbat service and Steve Burton was talking and he misquoted tithing and he was talking about it. I'm like, wait, that's not what that verse says. And I went and I got my Bible and I looked it up and I read it out loud and I was like, wow, he's actually lying to me to get me to do something that is not required by biblical law or at at all even. So tithing, I learned later, like in Roman law, was 10% of income, and that's what was charged to citizens in Rome. That's what
Mhm.
Pharisees and Sadducees were like. Hey, you need to pay. Even Jesus said it: "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's." Right, and so with that, and I learned that I was like, wow. So I'm not obligated to tithe. Tithing means a sacrifice given out of faith. I'm like, I'm doing enough of that, like without even writing a check each month. And so for someone to tell me that, join a group, we need you to give money for, like t-shirts and like keeping the lights on and stuff like that, I was like, no way. Um, and then, with this group to come out later to do some research and actually find out who this person is and where they live, and like the fact that they don't need my money, like that was one of the things that started my deconstruction. And that's not just with MTOI, it's with all of them. They're all like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
It's from my perspective too, because
yeah.
I was friends with a lot of people who have ministries and created and led ministries, and I know exactly what you mean. It's kind of shameless the way some people are with money, and you got people out here who literally have nothing, sold everything, gave it to the poor type people because they want to follow the teachings of Jesus so like sincerely, and what little they have left, they're sending it off to somebody. I'm not going to name names, but somebody they're trying to create a Christian box office comic book movie that's going to cost millions of dollars, and they're raising millions of dollars for this thing. Obviously, this thing never came to fruition, like many other of these projects that people come up with. And it just the man himself who runs the ministry doesn't need that money, and he himself is fine. And then just the idea itself, since we're Torah observant, we were so we're always trying to find ways to apply the Torah to our lives as best as we can.
Yep.
But it's funny because if we're very, very literal with the teachings of Torah, the Levites didn't get a land inheritance in Canaan. And so
Hmm.
God gave each of the tribes a land inheritance in Canaan, except for the Levites. And he said that uh, that God himself is their inheritance or something like that. It was very vague. But then it goes on to explain that since the Levites have to do all the priestly duties, take care of all the temple stuff, that they wouldn't have, I guess the assumption would be that they wouldn't have the ability to do all the other farming and cattle raising. And so everyone needed to donate to them to feed them and help them and make sure that they were keeping themselves going. But literally, no one alive today is a Levite that we are aware of, descended from the line of Abraham, performing priestly ritual sacrifice duties all day long in the temple. That doesn't exist.
Right.
So it is funny how, first of all, when Christians try and use those texts to get tithe, it's very funny because they hate the Old Testament every other instance. But even when Torah people do it, you're like, come on, that's not really what it says. I mean, there's no reason I don't have livestock to give to any Levites, so we should just like forget this whole thing. But yeah, there's always a need for support, though, isn't there?
Yeah, but it's confusing, isn't it, though? Because it says in like the Old Testament that it's required, and
Mhm.
that 10%, and that was what was Rome's. That's what Caesar took. That's what you were obligated to give. But it's like, wait a minute, we're not living in biblical times for one. And then when you flip into the New Testament and you look at like sin and things like that, there's no
Mhm.
mention of needing to tithe for sin. There's a guilt offering mention in like the Old Testament, but not the New Testament. So it's like
Right.
understanding that is really confusing, and it's like, but Christians only cover one half of the book and not the other. And so if you don't know both sides of it, then you're
Mhm.
not going to, as you remember, you're not going to know that both things are false. So it's like
Right.
I have gotten to a place where I think the whole thing is necessary. Looking at how it was actually constructed, what was the viewpoint in that time, the historicity of it, and not just what's written, because
Mhm.
there's a lot of error and a lot of contradiction. Like,
Oh yeah.
yeah, the tithe thing was just like one of many like basic concepts that you get thrown at when you're
Mhm.
you're naive, you're in Sunday school, and they're telling you about being charitable, and it's like that always comes up, like,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
it's
when these things started to like press you and make you start to second guess whether or not this was legit, did
yeah.
you spend any time with certain, like, did you go watch like debates about this type of stuff, or did you look at like Tobias Singer's work, or is there anyone in particular that you were like sort of studying to start helping you unravel everything?
Not really. I would just look at different things that were confusing to me that I never got an answer on, and just started to unravel it myself,
Mhm.
which is interesting because most people will say, like, there's got to be a person that you heard or someone say something about, like, how have you not considered this and you're a Christian? I mean, the whole thing that you brought up on Paul started a lot of really kind of breaking down what I fully believed.
Mhm.
And then once I knew that, I was like, wow, so what else? What else is
Right.
there? And you can kind of flip through different things and find it. And I just kind of put out a video about that on my channel with regard to like sin and
Mhm.
how one chapter says something and then the other one says something else, and it's like one chapter of the Bible will say not at all, not a thing, God only created good, he didn't create evil, but that's false because in Isaiah 45 it says that he created both. And so how can man not be composed of both? It's like there's
Right.
no way to get around that. We have
Mhm.
a natural nature, and so that's what makes sense. And some of that's mysticism, to believe in like a person is more than just what they try to be.
Mhm.
Um, but a lot of that is just saying, okay, let's be real. We're humans. We have different things that attract us or different things that fuel us, and it's not always going to be one way. And to try to live one way, like, yeah, like I said before, like it's not a thing for me at this point.
Yeah.
So I just started reading stuff, and I think narcissism was a big one. Just
Mhm.
trying to understand why I got treated the way that I did.
Mhm.
And that seems to be kind of the theme, I think, not
Mhm.
only in the Bible, but like leaders and members and stuff like that. Like they all take on that apologetic, um, putting themselves higher up. It's kind of like I call them fault finders now. They're constantly finding fault or like something wrong with someone else, or making themselves seem like they have more knowledge. You kind of
Mhm.
mentioned that earlier. And
Mhm.
so just stuff like that, like thinking about the things that I had experienced, and is this really how I want to live my life? Is this really important? And the answer is no. Um,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's like it's interesting because when you, for me at least, I remember there was a couple of big bangers, like videos I watched, books I read, or just
Mhm.
even thoughts I was sort of like thinking out. And I remember there's a couple of big bangers that really shook my faith. Not like I don't know. I was always excited to learn new things and to be. I'm always excited to be challenged because I like to change. Actually, I like to find out that I'm wrong because I get a dopamine hit when I realize that I'm doing something wrong and I can fix it. It makes me really happy, actually. But it's like the first couple things make you struggle a little bit when and it's so interesting because for every single person, there's a different thing that gets them like going like, wait a second. And sometimes I've met people who are deep philosophical thinkers, and they'll tell you that they were just reading a Noah's Ark book with their kid one day, and then realize this is all total bullshit, And you're like, "What? That's what did it for you?" And but
Yeah.
then it sets them off on this path of just questioning everything that they assumed was true, and
Yeah.
then one by one they just start falling off. They're like, "Oh, that's BS. That's BS. How did I believe this?" And before you know it, you got a whole mountain of reasons why you're not a Christian anymore.
Yeah.
So, did you manage to maintain any relationships with people from your old tour groups at all?
No.
Yeah.
No. Not one. And the same thing is always said, like, I'm not going to abandon you or whatever. And there's it's lies now,
Mhm.
to me, because people struggle, and life is struggle, life is change, and I'm for change. I'm for exploring new things, learning new things, trying new possibilities. And the first thing that kind of made people run off is when I started to question the stuff that I knew, and I questioned my faith, and it was like, that was it. There's nobody left. Like,
Like cockroaches with the light switch.
yeah, gone. They just like run off. Yeah. Yep.
I totally feel that, man. I mean, for me, it was like a slow cascading of dominoes,
Yeah.
and but obviously I was in the limelight, so it was a lot more of a quick like rush. Everyone found out at once that I'm an antichrist now. But for a lot of people who aren't in that same position, it kind of happens slowly, one friend at a time, a couple things at a time, and then eventually it escalates into like, well, I'm by myself now. Um, so, and you're very, very fortunate too to have your family with you, your husband and kids and stuff that are supportive. That's awesome. And of course, I tried to build sort of a deconstruction, like ex Torah support group thing. I mean, I think you were part of that on Facebook for a while.
Yeah.
Just to create a landing place for people who wanted to ask questions, but at the same time, um, nothing really ever is. Even if you have a whole room full of people who just came out of Torah or just came out of Christianity at the same time, you still all kind of feel individually a little bit lost and alone because you're like, who am I now? And these people can answer for me the questions I have. I know I learned to care a little bit less about the philosophical opinions of people and
Right.
started caring more about like, let me just completely figure this out on my own. Because even well-intentioned, good-hearted people can tell you something that's not true because they believe it. And so yeah, I just went back to square one. I'm like, I don't want to see any woo-woo, anything, any spiritual, any mind tricks. I just want to know facts and numbers. But like I said before, I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious. So I'm not closed off to metaphysical stuff and all that. But
Yeah.
yeah, so you started asking questions. You found answers to the stuff you were looking for. You saw your relationships tested very strongly. Is there anything specifically that just totally sealed the deal for you, or is that something you feel like you've already covered that made you feel really confident that there's no question, like there's no threat to being done with this?
Yeah, there was a lot. The stuff that I found out on my own through research was like the first part of it. But the second part of it was it's hard for me to talk about, but it needs to be said because I'm sure that there's at least one other person that can probably relate to this. And that's the actions of members of a congregation and or not. It occurs outside the church too. I'll just put it that way. So I would say that people are what pushed me completely out, and that's why I renounced my faith. Let's see, it's been about a year now that I have been looking at my own actions and taking accountability and responsibility for myself.
Mhm.
And that's something I've never done. I've always, as someone that has grown up a Christian and had Christian friends, I've always been the person that's taken on everybody else's shit, like, and had that put on me. And
Mhm.
so, to be honest, I had a situation in the last year where I got kind of usurped in my belief. And I'm not going to mention names, but one of the people that kind of brought this about was someone I knew most of my life. And we met when I was a lot younger. And so she was atheist when I met her, and I was full blown Christian. And so the basis of the relationship was like pretty narcissistically abusive.
Mhm.
So she was competitive with me, and so guess what? Atheist goes to Christian. So she becomes Christian like within like a 3 or 4 year stretch. Like we weren't talking at that time, but when I reconnected with her in 2018, like she's Christian now, and I was like, oh, that's really weird, because you were very much atheist. Like I couldn't get you to come to my wedding or your husband because you had to step inside a church, and that was like a huge
Wow.
thing with their family. Like they didn't want to do it. she was completely opposed, didn't want to be there, and I had to like almost feel like I had to bribe her to be able to get her to like stand as my maid of honor and like hold a ring for me. It was that bad. And so for her to say that to me, I was like, wow, so to fast forward, let's see, probably it was last year. Uh, we split again over like differences in doctrine
Hmm.
and differences on Paul in particular, because I was like, hey, you really need to check this out. Like, you really need to think about what you believe and like what you let influence you. And I was like, there's a lot of doctrine in the New Testament. So I'm like, if you're going to believe, you really need to sort it out, and was kind of questioning it. And I was telling her about it. And I was like, hey, I would do my research. Like, it's really important to know history and stuff like that. So we had a falling out in 2021 that led to like an extended falling out. Like, she had said that she forgave me and stuff, and so we reconnected last year. And she introduced me to a friend of hers that has a small YouTube channel. And I kind of got back into like being really, really into faith.
Hmm.
Um, and was like going down the same path again. I felt like I was kind of sort of in Torah, but like I was deceived. I was like, okay, and what they refer to as deceived as is like someone that is kind of out but kind of in. So it was like I had one foot out, one foot in, but I was deceived in that I um was following someone again. So like I had gone back into being led, and I
Hmm.
didn't realize that someone could do that. And so I had fellowship with this person for about a year. Um, and all of the things that were shared in fellowship ended up turning out to be a form of triangulation where the things that I shared in confidence were used against me, and they were going back to my friend, and so I was involved in like this three-way argument with the two of them. And this person ended up like taking the things that I had shared and putting them on her channel on YouTube, and there's like 6 or 7 videos that make mention to conversations that we had. Um,
Was it like they were disagreeing with you and they were like trying to, or they're taking the wisdom you shared and they're using it like it's their own? Is it like that?
yeah, it's like that, and then it's also like accusing me of being, a non-believer and being this horrible person, this liar, this like evil, uh, not who you say you are type of person. And this all comes from the friend that I had for like 20 years. Like, she instigated all of this and like actually connected me to this person. And so the interesting thing is like the message, even though this was a separate like friendship, totally separate thing, it ended up overlapping, and I ended up hearing the same things from this guy that I heard from her. And I was like, wow. So
Mhm.
like they're talking about it behind my back, which isn't gossip. Like, isn't that like something you don't do when you believe? Isn't being a hypocrite something that you speak against? And it really started to come clean to me. And I went through a phase where I just completely shut down after that. And I was like, wow, I've had this happen to me since I was 17. In one
Mhm.
way or another, I've seen Christians behave poorly. And even if they don't call themselves Christians, like they still are indoctrinated enough inside the church or out where they're still doing it.
Mhm.
And it's
It's disgusting.
it's really sick. Like and so going through that whole experience was like, I'm done. I was
Hmm.
done.
I
I
totally
dropped it
get that.
all. Yeah, I dropped it. I was like, I'm done. How can you tell me this stuff all my life and then stab me like that repeatedly, and not just ideas or things, but to manipulate, to like come in and manipulate someone's life and make them feel like they're important and that you care about what they have to say, and spend hours talking to them and getting to know them, and then um, let them go. And so in this time frame, and this is the biggest example I have with this situation, like in hypocrisy, I had a friend that has been an addict most of his life, and at this point was like really down and out. He almost died before Christmas last year,
Mm.
and I reconnected with him. And so when I'm mentioning this to like my two former friends, they're like, "You can't talk to him. He doesn't believe." He actually does. He actually is Christian, but they were like, "You can't talk to him because he's part of your past and he's into drugs and he's made all these mistakes." And I was like, "Wow!" Like, but who was
That
the
ain't it.
most compassionate person like that we learned about that said never do that? It's like, come on.
That's
How can
crazy.
how can you say that and do this? And how can you not have a reaction or not say anything about it,
Mhm.
And it's kind of like treat me as an outsider. And so that's what ended up kind of getting me to the point where I am now.
Yeah,
And it helped me change my life. I think right now I would say it's for the better.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I know exactly what you mean. Like there, certain relationships are kind of the dynamic or is kind of hard to really um, explain fully unless like you're in the situation or you're there watching it play out. But I've had relationships with people um, that sound very similar. Where and there's still a guy out there running around on YouTube who is continuing to do this, but they will like bring you in, and they're covert narcissists really, unless you know them, and then it's not covert anymore. But they'll bring you in, they'll make you feel special, and they'll make you feel desired, and like your input's valuable to them, and sometimes they'll even tell you that you are their mentor and things like that, and so you just feel very comfortable and safe, and you share all your ideas with these people, and then to have your ideas end up on their channel in some like documentary they created, and they don't even give you any credit whatsoever, or they're
Hmm.
running around like using your work for their own. I've seen that many, many times. And the same person who did that, so it sounds familiar to me to what you've experienced. The same person who did that will also turn right the hell around and stab you right in the back as soon as you start messing with like for me, I was the things I was saying and teaching started messing with his popularity, his credibility, his income, and so I had to go. And I went from being best friend in the whole world slash father figure to him to being outcast. He's lost. No one talked to him. Please, no one talk to him because he's. And they start gaslighting and they say things never happened that actually happened. And it's like the little details of those little relationships are very hard to pull out again for people who aren't there watching and experiencing it. But you
Yeah.
can really feel and see the narcissism, like and how they're just manipulating and using. And then on top of that, it's like Christians love to say, "Oh, well, that sounds like you left the faith because of man, not because of God." And it's like, no, situations like that just bring forward and capitalize and emphasize the fact that no human you've ever met has treated you so shittily except for Christians over and over and over again. And then at some point you're like, no, I can blame this dude all I want because he's supposed to be a man of God, and he's got all these followers, and it was supposed to be my friend. And it's not necessarily that one person turns you away from Christ. It's that they are just a perfect example of a straw that broke the camel's back. Like, I'm not going to get rug burns from this BS anymore. And you start to say, you know what, it's all bullshit. I can tell because every one of you guys have the same look in your eye. You know what I mean? It's hard. I know what you mean. It's difficult to sort of communicate, I guess.
Yeah, and the thing is too with all of this is I was looking back through emails and like deleted stuff the other day and thinking about what I had been through,
Hmm.
and I was reading an email from this former friend of mine, and then I was kind of skim reading it, and I was like, wow, same argument as always, center this, center that, blah blah blah, and then
Be afraid.
it's just so like there's so much hate in it. There's so
Hmm.
much hate in it, and the more I read it, it triggered me. It
Hmm.
it heavily triggered me, and the next day I was talking to my husband about it, and I'm like, "Drew, I can't believe I let her talk to me like that. I can't believe I felt so bad about who I was that I let someone put that fear and that shame and that guilt in me repeatedly for like an extended amount of time." Meanwhile, I can't, and I'm sure this next comment's probably gonna come back to hit me, but I can't think of an example right now at this time where I can say that I ever sent an email like that to
Yeah.
anyone.
Right.
Um, and these were repeated messages. I think I kind of shared some stuff with you about this, how I had received this for a really long time. Well, one of the key red flags of narcissistic abuse that I've learned about now is that you lose your job, you lose your identity, you lose who you are in that, and it's like you end up walking on eggshells. And I just remember that this email that I read the other day, like, is just one of like thousands of texts that were sent that were just the same, that eroded jobs for me, eroded these opportunities in my life that were really important. And I couldn't focus because I had someone that was just, really, I think, enjoying it, like
Mhm.
enjoying making me miserable and taking away like my confidence, to be completely honest. And
Mhm.
so that's the other piece of like deconstructing that was really hard, is not only did I have to pull off like all of this like bullshit that I learned from a belief system for like probably 30 some plus years of my life, but I also had to look at the people that were teaching me to believe were the people that were actually harming me at the same time. And so I had to pull off narcissistic abuse too.
Mhm.
And it
Mhm.
was kind of like being split in half for about the first year, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah, when you reached out to me and you sent me something on spiritual abuse, it changed my life because I read the article and I went, I meet every single one of these criteria, and I was shocked
Mhm.
that I had been that susceptible to it. But what I
Same.
realize is like I'm in, mental health field. You can be educated, some more or less. You can be um, different, like in terms of how much money you make, your age, whatever. But abuse is abuse, and it all affects people the same way. It just takes a while to figure it out. And so,
Mhm.
unfortunately for me, it took me 22 years to figure out that my best friend was a narcissist.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
That was when I started sharing that religious trauma syndrome and spiritual abuse stuff. I had just found it too, and I probably felt the same way you did when I first saw it. I read through it. I'm like, "What's this about?" And literally as I read through it, I'm like, "Oh my god, I've been experiencing this for a long time." And it's just funny to me, like when people become educated on mental health, it can really help to unravel a lot of things. And I'm glad you brought up narcissistic personality disorder and narcissism in general, because now that I really have studied the crap out of narcissism for a couple of years, I know that the Christian church could not exist without it. And the God of the Bible is 100% the worst example. Oh no, the best example of a narcissist we can see in literature, in my opinion. And so, all these little uh, men running around trying to be like God, or it's just crazy. The lack of justice and the whole patriarchal system really stems from a narcissistic God, which gives us permission to act narcissistically towards other people. And a lot of Christians don't realize they're doing it because they think that they're just using their discernment. They call it something else. They call having no empathy and judging people for their personal decisions. They call that using discernment, and they call
yeah.
that evangelism and discipling and things. But if you take all the legal or Christian religionese away from it, you are emotionally abusing people. You are attacking them based on protected classes. You're being a
Mhm.
total narc and have no empathy for where they're at or what their feelings are. And so that's why you have these people whether it be a Christian at a gay pride parade yelling at everyone that walks by, or whether it be an email from a best friend of 10 years who's just nitpicking you and tearing you apart and telling you like why you're such a terrible Christian or whatever. It's the same thing. It's still emotional abuse. And I think that if more Christians could really study and understand that, they would realize that they are in it. They're trapped themselves in a system, and they might be perpetuating the abuse. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that helps you. It helped me a lot. That's for sure.
Yeah, and there's so many different layers to it too, like Christianity in itself, and Torah and Judaism, and anything that requires someone to live for something or to kind of adopt it is ego based. And so it's like people automatically take on an ego based situation when they're in that. And so that's why you get that head swelling that goes on, because people take on a narrative. And that's what I did. And I fully believed in my early 20s, before I got into Buddhism, and I would say probably again over the last year and a half, I thought I was doing the right thing. And so, yeah, like that discernment piece, like if that's what a disciple is, like that just sucks. Like my life was completely based on looking at everything around me as being evil.
Yep.
Everything around me, I had to pull away from. I couldn't do anything. I wasn't allowed to talk to people if they weren't practicing like me or believing like me. And how is that right? You know, and how is being outside in nature and connecting, how is that wrong? That like that to me is not even like the same thing. And so theology is so for the ego and so for someone who has nothing else. It's like an empty shell thing. Um, and the people that I feel like still belong, they don't have anything else. They don't have an identity. I hate to classify it like that, but that's what I see. It's like you're not living up to your full potential because you've chosen to believe in something like this. And I just look at like the repercussions of it, you know, financially, not just with family and friends and stuff, but that financial piece and like, you know, giving up your achievements. It's just not,
Right.
it's not worth it. And so, you know, they look at the non-believer as someone who is full of ego, but I think the opposite's true. I think once you come out of something like this, you just really want to be able to be happy and experience that. And it's not about destroying someone or making someone miserable or, you know, going out and sinning all the time and killing people and like whatever the hell else like they think is what, you know,
Right.
atheists and agnostics do. I would say we're probably some of the most like chill, non-violent people ever. And
No.
so to pigeonhole me like that pisses me off. Like I'm not like that. And so, you know, please don't. Like I spend my time with my family and like growing stuff. I'm, you know, I'm into like growing orchids and like reconnecting with stuff. I'm not anything about living for someone else or someone else's ideas, their theology, nothing anymore. And that's what my channel's about. It's just that, like thinking, like actually using critical thinking and like deciding, is this what I want to do or is this not what I want to do? And
Yeah.
going from there, like not letting someone tell you, hey, like you just need to do this because I said so.
Right.
I've had 40 years of that, so I'm good, man. Like I'm
I'm
good.
good. I'm full. Yeah. Let's not skip the dessert. I'm glad
Skip
you
it.
brought your channel because you were talking about the ego a second ago, and I wanted
Yeah.
to tell everyone that's watching that you actually have a great little series on breaking down the ego and discussing the ego, and I thought it was super well said, well spoken, and I actually enjoyed listening to it a lot. So I do want to encourage everyone to check that out once they're done watching all the stuff here. But also, you know, the other day I did a TikTok where I had just finished watching this long debate between Ray Comfort. You know who Ray Comfort is?
Yeah.
Okay, Ray
Yeah.
Comfort and Matt Dillahunty. And he's Matt Dillahunty's a famous atheist like debater. And I was kind of breaking down some of the whack stuff that Ray Comfort was saying. But one of the things that Ray said that I didn't even mention actually, and luckily the comments caught it and brought it out, is he talks about how he implies that he already knows what you know. You know deep down, Melanie, that you know you want to do wicked things. You know deep down that you're prideful of heart. But that's the biggest thing is he would say that the reason you're rebelling against what I'm saying, Ray Comfort, is because you are prideful of heart. And he kept every once in a while he drops that in there. Oh, by the way, the reason why you're rejecting this is because you're prideful of heart. And it's like, man, I didn't realize until recently that every time someone says that, they're totally projecting. They are prideful of heart. They can't be wrong, you know, whatsoever. There's nothing prideful about not believing in a fairy tale book of monsters and magic. There's nothing prideful about that. It's just common sense, you know. But it takes a prideful person to cram it down your throat like they have every ounce of truth on earth, and you're just out here wanting to sin. Like they think that I'm out here doing lines of cocaine on a bunch of like hookers or something as soon as I left Torah because that's what I want to do. You know, it's like, no, I don't want to do that. Like my moral compass hasn't shifted at all. You know, if anything, I've become more empathetic and more open and more loving to people than I ever have been. Because, like you said earlier, when you start to make assumptions about people, they're all living the way they're living because they're prideful, because they hate God, because they want to do cocaine on hookers. you you are actually dehumanizing those people, and you're turning them into demons. And I think that's what causes Christians to be so unempathetic towards the public in general, is they've dehumanized them to such an evil extent that these people don't even deserve empathy. Kind of the way my ex-wife used to treat me. She thought I was so terrible that I don't deserve basic human rights. I don't deserve fairness in court, fairness in conversation, because I had pissed her off so bad 20 years ago that I don't deserve it today. You know, it's a crazy mindset, really. And
Yeah.
I love talking to atheists and agnostics, especially those who left Christianity and left other faiths, because when you hit them with the same statement, they're like, so you're like, so did you become super evil after you left Christianity? They always laugh, 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 laugh. They became nicer, happier, more loving. They got more friends. They've done less cocaine. I'm just kidding. No one's doing any cocaine. It's just a joke, but you get my point.
Yeah, we're not what we're made out to be. And the most interesting thing I found recently is I read that atheism, being agnostic, and like all of these different viewpoints,
Mhm.
uh, are a way of seeing scripture. So they're not what we were taught. We were taught like in the church that if you were, an atheist, that like you hated God and like you were this evil person. And like you said, you're out doing like all this crazy shit because you no longer believe. So it's like, wow, now I can do whatever I want. It was
Yeah.
like that, but that's not how it is. It's like atheism and agnostics are a rational viewpoint. They're not sure what happened, and so it's like, okay, yeah, this could be true, or maybe it's not, but I'm not going to say that like the Bible is like the story of, because
Mhm.
it definitely, from what you can see in history, is not, and was written by people living in a really messed up time. And so, I mean, I look at it this way, like celebrities are kind of writing their own religion. What's the difference? Like,
Yeah.
honestly,
Mhm.
human ideas are human ideas. And
Absolutely.
in Judaism, it's the Talmud, it's rabbis, it's midrash, it's the same thing. So it's like no matter how you spin it, each one of these religions, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Buddhism, whatever, they all have morals and a compass for living. And it's like, yeah, I think maybe, to be honest, and it was a good point, I still have my moral values. I didn't lose those just because I saw through the veil and got out of the bullshit. Like I just don't think that that's gonna work for me, and it just is what it is. I mean,
I don't think it works for anybody, honestly. I think they're convincing themselves it's working and nothing's actually happening. There's no blesses or curses of the law coming into effect in anybody's life. If that was true even at all, then certainly by now there'd be some small group of Torah keepers who have like taken over the world and they're billionaires and God blesses everything that they do. And that never happens. In fact, you look at Job, and if you keep the Torah like a righteous man should, God will just send Satan to mess with you for no reason because of
yep.
God's ego. So there's no benefit to keeping Torah other than maybe not eating, you know, certain foods that may or may not be healthy for you. Stupid stuff like that. But so
Yep.
as we get to sort of wrapping up, I wanted to ask you, what if you could give three pieces of advice to anyone out there in internet land who's either practicing Torah right now, or even just a Christian in general who's made it this far into this video, and they're thinking about walking away from their faith, um, what what advice would you give them?
I would say do it. I would say walk away. If you're doubting, walk away, because there's a reason why you reach a certain point and you doubt. That's what my experience has been like. I would go in and out of different things with Christianity. I traveled through a lot of different groups. I've had the gamut of things, and I always got back to that place where I was like, something just doesn't sound right or feel right. And I think from what I know at this point, that if you're doubting, explore why you're doubting. Start researching, start reading, start learning about what you actually believe or what you've been taught. Once you start doing that, it gets a lot more clear and a lot easier to make a decision. I I wouldn't want to make any kind of statement that would say like telling someone to just give up.
Right.
Um, but I think if you're questioning, you need to, because I remember learning something which is kind of what helped me base my decision when I was younger. That if you do believe in God, He'd rather have you 100% than not at all. And so that's something that I learned when I was like 10 years old, I think. And
Right.
knowing that, it's like that would help someone, I think, make a decision that's right for them.
Mhm.
Um, because I mean, I'm not like going to my family and being like, "Hey, I don't believe anymore, so here's why you shouldn't either." Like
Right.
that's not my thing. But I think you
You don't
need
have
to
to
really
you don't have to
consider. Yeah,
proselytize anymore.
yeah, no, never did. I could never do that one. I was always against it, and never liked people knocking on my door trying to get me to join, some group or whatever. Like I just, yeah, and I won't do it now. But I think understanding history, understanding how Christianity was founded and where it comes from is like another thing that I would say if someone's questioning to do. Because if you believe, you need to know your foundation, you need to know what historical events contributed to it. If you don't, it's almost like ignorance is bliss.
Mhm.
So doing that, and then the rest is like up to the person,
Mhm.
uh, and what they decide is right or wrong. And that's just how I live. Is I make a decision after, giving it a lot of thought. And I came to a place where this wasn't overnight for me. So I get like that fear of leaving and losing a community. But I can say this statistically, there's probably 23% in the last 2 years of all religions, people are coming out in droves. And so if
Mhm.
that influences someone's decision, then it does.
Mhm.
So you're not alone. Like, you're just
Yeah,
not. Yeah.
totally, totally. That's so true. There's a huge community of people leaving religion from all different religions, and they're growing and building everywhere. I'm with you on that, and I think that's really good advice too. If you're questioning and having doubts and stuff, I always tell people, if you're having doubts or questioning, then you should go learn every single argument against what you believe, and then
Yeah.
see if you can defeat them. You know, and honestly, I just don't think you can make a logical and honest decision until you do know both sides of the story. And for most people, really, like you said, really digging into the historicity, of how the Bible was created, compiled, who wrote what, and all this stuff. Which people, I think Christians would be very surprised to find out that there's so much we don't know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think then you can start to make some better like judgments. And you're right, you're not alone. It's certainly not alone. You're with us at least, right? You can
That's
people
right.
will talk to
Yeah.
you in the comments at the very least, and I'll see you on TikTok or whatever. Or they can go watch
Yeah.
your channel and build community there as well. So, speaking of which, what are your favorite resources for deconstructing content right now? It can be books, websites, YouTube channels, anything like that. What do you recommend for people to check out if they're interested?
I believe when I first kind of started to come out of stuff, that there's a group online that it deconstructs like cult mentality, but I'm not sure of the name of it. I think it's like the International like Cult Research Foundation or something like that.
Okay.
They're super helpful because it's a way to look at how things are um, shared with you when you're a member of a congregation, and
Mm,
it helps you like understand like how you actually are kind of maybe at forced kind of to do the things that you do. You mentioned like proselytizing is a big one, like going out and speaking truth, stuff like that. stuff like that. How does that happen? And so that was a really like interesting one for me. I want to say Banner Banner Under Heaven by John Steinbeck.
Okay.
Um, I watched the movie. I haven't read the book yet, which is horrible. Usually it should go the other way around. But the movie was about Mormon, an LDS family, and it's a true story about a family that commits a lot of crime and kind of washes it through the LDS church. And so it's really interesting. And it shows like how the family got away with it. So that
Mm,
was another thing that, like, because of the hypocrisy that I saw, I was like, yeah, that fits. Um,
mm,
and then I really love Alan Watts for like helping me to meditate on positive things and not being so rigid in polarity. Like when you come out of religion, you're extremely rigid and like you don't see the good in anything. And so he's helped kind of like expand my thought and the way that I live my life and question more the things that I already know to be
mhm.
true. And so just that perspective is really good. There's a lot that I could say. A World of Myth was a good book that I read. I can't remember the author. I think the last name is like Leering.
Okay.
Um,
All right, cool. Yeah, I'll make sure to link some of this stuff below too, so that we can get people to where they're looking to go. And I love Alan Watts. I'm glad you brought him up. I love Alan Watts,
yeah,
and he's been really. I fall asleep listening to stuff at night usually.
yeah,
Jackie and I do, and we've fallen asleep 1,000 times to Alan Watts speaking, and he just really gives an excellent perspective on everything, and
yeah.
yeah, love him so much. And
His book Just So is the one I was gonna say is like really
just so
big. Just So, yeah, because it talks about um, he was actually raised Catholic, and so he left Catholicism at a young age, and he started to study science and kind of develop his own perspective of things, but I can really relate to it, so that's a really good book. But he's got a ton of resources. Richard Carrier, of course, like Dr. Richard Carrier, Historicity of Jesus was like a big one. I got the audiobook so I could actually hear him read it, which was
oh, that's cool.
phenomenal. Yeah, yeah. So it has like his spin on each chapter, and it's not just like reading it, so you can like actually hear him
Oh,
talk through it. Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
I'm gonna listen to the audiobook. I haven't. That's a good idea.
Seekers of Unity. The creator on Seekers of Unity is he's a Hasidic Jew.
Hmm.
Um, in Hasidic Judaism, natural born, so he has taken a perspective from his channel and made it so that all faith or non-faith is welcome, and so it's just like a learning community. And he's speaking out against a ton of different things and sharing ideas, and so it's just a way to learn about, like, I learned about Kabbalah through him and a ton of other things. Esoterica is a huge one for me. Justin Sledge is amazing, like really really historical. Those are good ones to like get your facts straight. If you're
Hmm.
still a Christian, get your facts straight.
Yep.
And you can listen to those channels and still like have a completely different perspective. They're all educational, so it's not like, one person's pushing something on you. I'm
Mhm.
not into that, so I'm not going to recommend it. Last one is Battelle Skater. She's phenomenal. She
Patel
helped
Skater.
Battelle Skater.
Oh,
Yeah,
Patel. Okay.
yeah, yep,
All right.
yeah,
Cool. Yeah, I'll
yeah.
make
She
sure I get all these
covers
links in the.
narcissism.
Oh, so go ahead. Go ahead.
Nope, that's okay. So she covers narcissism really well in her channel, and so that's been super helpful.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Cool. Cool.
yeah,
Yeah. I'll make sure we get all those in the description box so people can look at all the different things you just mentioned and check them out. Hopefully, we'll help them on their growth journey. But I also want to make sure everyone gets a chance to go to your channel, and your channel is
mhm,
called Swim Against the Current. It's here on YouTube. And again, I
yeah,
will link that near the top of the description here so you can go find Melanie very easily. And I can't say enough about I know you just got started and you've just got a little bit of content out so far, but already it's so full of depth and value, especially to deconstructing Christians, that I have to encourage everyone to go at least check it out. And I'm sure they can stay in contact with you over there. And
Yeah.
did you want me to give them your email if they want to reach out to you directly?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, okay. So she's at sacredrainbow22 at outlook.com. And again, I'll link that below. So, yeah, I mean, we could go on forever and ever, I'm sure, because we both have been through so much of the same journey in different ways. So maybe we'll have more conversations in the future, maybe on my channel and yours. We'll see where it goes. But thank you again for coming on. Is there anything else you wanted to just say or close with before we wrap it up?
No,
Nope.
good. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again, Melanie, and thank you to everyone who took the time to watch and hang out with us. If you are in Christianity, or especially if you're still Torah Observant Christian, I really hope that some of the stuff we talked about today helped you to think through and deconstruct what may have been some bad assumptions that you have been given. So anyway, hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll be in touch. Thanks again, Melanie.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.